James's unforgettable first love divorced after being cheated on. He didn't hesitate to break up with me and post it on social media. Really wish I could go back 8 years and change Mary's fate of marrying that scumbag. Mary. The unforgettable first love he's always yearned for. Later. I traveled back in time with him to 8 years ago. He changed the fate of his first love, preventing her from marrying the scumbag. I changed my fate of being with him. Chapter 1. When I saw James's post. I had just finished an 8-hour surgery on a patient. On the way back to my office, I fainted in the corridor due to exhaustion. When I woke up again, I was in a dim, unfamiliar private room. Colorful lights flashed everywhere, and explosive music played in the background. Someone patted my shoulder and asked, "Brooklyn, your alcohol tolerance is terrible. You're down after just one drink." As my blurred vision gradually focused, I saw the person in front of me. It was Mary, a short burgundy dress, slightly curled long hair, and her bright, stunning face. I stared at her for a few seconds in silence before stumbling into the bathroom. Looking at the fair, delicate face in the mirror, I repeatedly splashed cold water on my forehead, unable to deny the fact the scar was gone. I had traveled back to 8 years ago, my first year in college. Today was my roommate Mary's birthday, and I had mistakenly drunk a highly potent alcoholic drink, passing out on the couch for a long time, with a groggy head. I had just stepped out of the bathroom when I bumped into someone. Before I could apologize, a familiar, deep voice sounded in my ear. "Sorry, are you okay?" My fingers tightened around my phone instinctively. I looked up at the man in front of me, a tall, straight figure, sharp, deep-set features, wearing only a loose, plain black t-shirt. It was James. Our eyes met and locked for a few seconds, ignoring the cryptic look in his eyes. I lowered my gaze and calmly said I was fine before brushing past him. As I sat back down on the couch in the private room, just as I took a sip of mineral water, James walked in. Mary beamed and wrapped her arm around his, introducing him to us. "This is my brother, James. He studies at university and next door." The flickering lights continued to move. He looked down at us with one hand in his pocket, nodding slightly. If we don't count our accidental encounter in the corridor, this would be the first time we met in our previous life. James, the half-brother of Mary from different parents, the man I loved and was with for 6 years. I realized he didn't love me when Mary got married. He got drunk and held me, gently calling, "Minnie, Minnie." At that moment, I felt completely empty. It took me a long time to realize that Minnie was Mary. The person he loved was Mary. Unfortunately, it was when I loved him the most. So I sat through the night, pretending nothing had happened the next day, and continued to be with him, still believing what he had once told me. "She's just my sister." Later, when Mary divorced after being cheated on, I heard her with my own ears, leaning tearfully in James's arms, crying, "Brother, I never loved him. It's you. The person I love is you. Do you still want me?" She said her mother had a heart condition and threatened her with her life, forbidding them from being together. So she pretended to love someone else, which is why she paired him with me. I didn't know if that was true, but James believed her. So that night, James found me. After a long silence, he said hoarsely, "Brooklyn, let's break up." Looking at his handsome face, I didn't even get the chance to ask the obvious reason before I was called in for an emergency surgery. Forcing myself to suppress all emotions with reason and calmness, I spent 8 hours in the operating room. When I came out, I saw James's post on social media. Really wish I could go back 8 years and change Mary's fate of marrying that scumbag. Chapter 2. Now, having the chance to relive everything, I finally noticed the details I had either overlooked or deliberately ignored before. For instance, the birthday cake James brought, which he made with his own hands for Mary, or how he gently coaxed the bottle of alcohol out of Mary's hands when she clung to it, or how, at the end of the party, a drunken Mary wanted James to carry her back, and without hesitation, he did. The other 2 roommates watched and sighed. Her brother is way too good to her. At that time, I naively believed he was just her brother. So later, when Mary found someone she liked and kept pushing me towards James, I indeed developed feelings for him, someone so handsome, gentle, and attentive. It wasn't until the truth was revealed that I belatedly realized his gentleness and attentiveness were never directed at me. Whether it was birthdays or anniversaries, he was always uninterested. As long as Mary was around, his attention would always be on her. From beginning to end, the person James loved was always Mary. Just like now, when I was pulled into James's car, sitting in the back seat with my roommate, half asleep, at a red light, James turned and gazed lovingly at Mary, who was also passed out in the front seat from drinking. The evening breeze lifted a strand of hair by my ear. I silently maintained my composure in the dim light, my half-open, blurred vision catching James raising his right hand towards Mary, whispering softly, "Minnie, this time, I won't let you marry him." My heart pounded violently at that moment. I closed my eyes, sinking into darkness, fully realizing that James had also traveled back in time. He wouldn't let Mary marry anyone else, and I wouldn't be with him again. Back at the dormitory, lying on a bed that was both familiar and strange, the fan above hummed, blowing warm air. I rubbed my slightly aching head and drifted into sleep. In my dream, I seemed to be trapped in a loop, repeatedly reliving the 8 years from meeting James to breaking up. Over and over again hearing him say, "Brooklyn, let's break up." The sound of my phone vibrating pulled me from the nightmare. I opened my eyes and stared blankly for a few seconds before grabbing my phone and glancing at the schedule. Suddenly, I remembered that at this time, I had a part-time job as a tutor, helping a high school student with English. Seeing the time, I quickly got out of bed, washed up, grabbed a bag of bread, and took a bus to the student's home. Fortunately, I was teaching English, since my job later required me to read the latest medical academic papers. I hadn't neglected my English. After reviewing the teaching materials, I had a general impression I was tutoring a high school girl. After finishing the lesson I had prepared, I started helping her check the essay assigned by her school's English teacher, which was on a very common topic: me in 10 years. She rested her chin on her hand and asked, "Brooke, do you think I can become a comic artist in 10 years? I told her confidently, "You can. It wouldn't even take 10 years. 8 years later, she would become a popular comic artist with a large fan base. Then will Brooke also become a doctor?" "Yes," she hummed thoughtfully and then suddenly pointed excitedly out the window at a tall, slender figure walking under the trees with a black umbrella, declaring, "Then Mr. Wu must also become a physics researcher." Through the curtain of rain, I looked up and met his gaze. My heart suddenly contracted, and memories quietly surfaced. He wouldn't have 10 years. 2 years later, he would die in a car accident. Chapter 3. His name was Lucas Wu, a prized disciple of the strict physics professor at university and next door, and a frequent topic of conversation among many girls. He was repeatedly featured on various college confession boards, with everyone talking about how he was the perfect blend of looks and ability. The only flaw they could find was his humble background. In my memory, I didn't have much interaction with him. We had only crossed paths a few times in the library of our school, but the most vivid memory was during my 3rd year when I visited James in the hospital. On my way back to school, while crossing a green-lighted crosswalk with others, a speeding car ran a red light and came rushing towards us. Amidst the screams and chaos, a black Mercedes appeared out of nowhere at incredible speed and blocked the car. After the harsh sound of tires screeching on the pavement, both cars crashed into the distant guardrail. I instinctively started to run towards them, but halfway there, an unexpected explosion erupted, and flames instantly obscured my vision. The cicadas on the nearby camphor trees were briefly silenced before resuming their shrill cries. No one in the cars survived, and a piece of debris flew and cut my forehead, leaving a scar. Later, this incident made it to the trending news. The official report revealed that the 2 charred bodies belonged to the car's driver, a man who had lost everything to gambling and wanted to take revenge on society. With gasoline in the car, the other body was Lucas's. The car belonged to his professor. That day, Lucas was driving to another university to pick up some documents for his professor and happened to be on that road on his way back. Netizens quickly dug up all kinds of information about him. His photos spread across the internet, with many marveling at his looks and talent, lamenting his untimely death. Others remarked, "He saved so many families. At least he died with purpose, especially since he was all alone in this world." Lucas had no father growing up, and his mother passed away from a serious illness the year he took his college entrance exams. Indeed, he was alone, and no one would grieve his loss. The only thing left behind was the research project he was working on, which abruptly ended. 4 years afterward, no one was able to continue his work. Once, when I brought flowers to visit his grave, I encountered his professor, a chubby little old man, standing silently in front of the grave. It wasn't until the light rain began to fall that he sighed heavily. Ah, this kid, he had such a bright future ahead. For a long time after that, I suffered from insomnia, with my heart feeling like it was submerged in water, heavy and swollen. I think that was my guilt and sorrow for him. A gentle tug on my wrist brought me back to reality. Lucas's figure was no longer visible outside the window, and I heard my student's voice. Brooke, I have to go to Mr. Wu's physics class now. Remember what I just told you. Don't be late tomorrow night. In truth, I didn't hear what she had just said clearly, but memories from my previous life told me that tomorrow was her birthday. Because her parents were too busy to be with her, she had asked me to keep her company. The rain outside had stopped at some point, and as I looked at the warm sunlight peeking through the clouds, I suddenly remembered the information I had seen online about Lucas after his death. Tomorrow was also his birthday. Chapter 4. But in reality, Lucas didn't celebrate his birthday, because on the day he was born, his firefighter father died in a fire during a mission. He didn't even get to see him once. I think he probably wouldn't want to be wished a happy birthday, but it was the day he came into this world. It shouldn't be spent alone. So the next day, I arrived at the student's home with a cake and a gift before the scheduled time. At that time, Lucas was teaching. Outside the window, the sun was setting, and he was wearing a plain white shirt, holding a test paper while standing by the wooden desk, looking down at the questions, calm and graceful. Seeing this scene, rumors I had heard later involuntarily surfaced in my mind. It was a chat screenshot with no traceable source and questionable authenticity, containing only a few short lines of conversation. Someone asked him, "Lucas, do you have someone you like?" "Yes. Why don't you tell her?" The reply came about 3 minutes later. "Never mind." Most people didn't believe that someone with his looks would secretly harbor a crush, but by then he was already gone, and no one would ever know the truth. Even if it was true, his crush would never see the light of day. Whether it was his unseen father, his mother who died of illness, or his unspoken crush, his prematurely ended future, or his sacrifice unnoticed by others, he had too many regrets. A fragmented and broken life. Hastily concluded. A genius in the physics department at University A should not have met such an end. After the lesson ended, it was completely dark outside. My student eagerly rushed over to grab the drawing tools I had bought for her, sighing, "If only Mr. Wu didn't have plans, the three of us could have celebrated together." I pondered for a few seconds, then looked up at Lucas, who was packing up his things and preparing to leave. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Why don't you, Mr. Wu?" Just as the words left my mouth, the power suddenly went out, plunging the surroundings into pitch-black darkness. I coughed lightly, trying to stay calm as I lied. "Mr. Wu, why don't you stay? We, girls, are afraid of the dark." There was a brief moment of silence in the air before a small flame suddenly flickered to life. Lucas pressed down on the lighter with one hand and shielded the flame with the other, his features sharply defined by the light and shadow. He looked over and said in a low voice, "All right." By the light of the flickering flame, I placed the cake with lit candles in front of them, watching as they seriously said, "Today, we celebrate the continuation of life. May the rest of our days be filled with peace and happiness." Setting aside my guilt for him, no one wished more than I did for him to have a peaceful and happy life from now on. In the dimly lit room, we divided the cake, the sweet scent filling the air. My student bit her spoon and carefully ran to the study to fetch her report card, happily saying, "Brooke, my mom said I've made great progress in this exam, and to show her gratitude, she wants to treat you both to a meal." Looking at the grades on the report card, I remembered that this had indeed happened in my previous life. But at that time, Mary had called me to help move props for a photo shoot, so I politely declined the dinner invitation. As my thoughts returned, I suddenly looked at Lucas, who was sitting in the dim light, and clearly realized that on that dinner day in my previous life, I was supposed to meet him. Chapter 5. But in the end, I still couldn't make it to the appointment. On my way there, I injured my calf while saving a child who was nearly hit by a car and ended up in the hospital. To prove that I wasn't backing out at the last minute, I even took a picture and sent it to the students' parents. The injury wasn't serious, just a scrape on the skin, which stung a bit, but it didn't require hospitalization. While waiting for the doctor to apply medication, I unintentionally scrolled through Mary's moments and saw photos from her photography club's event. James was in the pictures too. Of course, as long as it's Mary, he's always there whenever she calls. I remember on our 4th anniversary, Mary had a fight with her boyfriend, got drunk at a bar, and called James while crying, "Brother, I'm so sad. Can you come and be with me?" We had just arrived at the restaurant we had reserved and hadn't even ordered when he got up to leave. I said I'd go with him, but he stopped me, saying, "Brooke, Minnie has always been proud. She wouldn't want you to see her in a vulnerable state." I asked him, "What about you? We grew up together." "It's different." Later, not long after Mary reconciled with her boyfriend, she playfully said to him at a gathering, "Humph, you're not the only one who likes me. If you make me angry again, I'll leave you." James silently drank his wine without saying a word. He must have always known that Mary was aware of his feelings but pretended not to, enjoying his affection without any burden while still being with the one she loved. And as for me, James could shut down all my words with a simple, "She's my sister, and your friend." Fortunately, this time around, I won't let myself be their doormat. After getting my wound bandaged, I hobbled out of the hospital, but it suddenly started raining halfway. Since my wound couldn't get wet, I endured the pain and quickly found a building for shelter, intending to call a cab, but as misfortune would have it, my phone died and shut off. The late summer breeze carried a slight chill, and just as I resigned myself to waiting for the rain to stop, Lucas appeared. He walked through the rain with an umbrella, wrapped his jacket around my injured calf, handed me the umbrella, and then picked me up, saying, "This path is too narrow to hail a cab. Let's find another spot." I leaned against him, a bit taken aback, inhaling the faint scent of bitter grapefruit, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, my gaze tracing from his Adam's apple to his profile. After getting into the car, I asked him how he ended up there. He casually explained that the student's mom was worried but had a meeting, so she asked him to come check on me when my phone was off and unreachable. He searched for a long time before finding me. Perhaps because of the rain, the car felt a bit stuffy, so I slightly cracked open the window, unable to imagine how many places he must have searched. Later, as the tension in my weary nerves eased, I drifted off to sleep and woke up just as we arrived at the school gate. After carefully helping me out of the car, Lucas carried me to the dormitory entrance. Before he left, I thanked him. He looked down at me with a slight smile and said, "No need to be so formal, Teacher Brooke." Back in the dormitory, I discovered that his jacket was still tied around my injured calf. Chapter 6. By the time I went to a university to return the jacket, it was already autumn. Due to my leg injury needing rest and the persistent drizzle, I hadn't left the campus much. The day I went to find Lucas, it was a sunny weekend. Upon arriving at the school, I realized I had been a bit impulsive, coming without knowing any of his details. Searching for someone like this was like finding a needle in a haystack. In the end, I didn't find Lucas, but I unexpectedly ran into James. I was passing by the basketball court when I heard someone shout amid the chaos, "Call an ambulance. He's fainted." Years of medical training kicked in, and I instinctively ran over, pushing through the crowd to see a boy lying unconscious on the ground. I immediately knelt down to check him and began performing CPR. About 15 minutes later, the boy gradually regained consciousness, and the school doctor arrived. Just as I was about to leave, I unintentionally noticed James standing in the crowd, watching me silently. Dressed in a red and black jersey, I calmly looked away, picked up the jacket, and turned to leave. Perhaps due to excessive attention, a boy's voice came from behind. "James, do you know her?" "No, I don't." I took the jacket to the nearest dessert shop to rest and regain my strength. The wind chime on the glass door occasionally rang with a crisp ding-dong. Bored. I played a game of Gamoku on my phone. Just as the chime rang again, a shadow suddenly fell over my table. I looked up. It was Lucas. The sound of game over came from my phone. I looked at him in surprise and smiled. What a coincidence! To think we'd run into each other like this. The next moment, he raised an eyebrow and said, "No coincidence. I came looking for you." Seeing my puzzled expression, he tapped his phone and placed it in front of me, showing a post on the campus confession wall searching for someone. The photo was of me saving the boy on the basketball court, with a caption, "In 3 minutes. I want to know everything about this woman." The post had only been up for less than half an hour, yet there were already hundreds of comments, mostly from people joining in the fun, with only a few seriously discussing. Judging by her professional CPR technique, she's probably from the medical school next door. What was she doing at our school? The jacket in her hand seems to be a man's. Could it be her boyfriend's? Is her boyfriend from our school? I stopped reading further, feeling a bit awkward as I handed him the jacket. It's been washed clean. That night, back at the dormitory, my gossip-hungry roommate immediately handed me her phone. The latest post on a university's confession wall read, "Case solved. She's Lucas from the physics department's girlfriend." The post included a picture of me handing the jacket to Lucas in the dessert shop, with a pink filter added, giving it an extra touch of ambiguity. As my roommate's gossiping spirit burned bright, I quickly explained everything to her. After hearing the whole story, she struggled to say, with a hint of disappointment, "Looks like there's potential. Let's ship it lightly for now." I smiled helplessly, glancing at Lucas's WeChat profile picture. His nickname was simply 2 words, Lucas. The avatar was a pure white origami crane. After thinking for a moment, I changed his note to, Teacher Wu, Chapter 7. His moments are very clean, with only one text post. The wind is rising. The time it was posted was the day we met. I don't know why, but I suddenly thought of another timeline. On the 6th anniversary of his death, after the rain, the sky cleared, and the sunset filled the sky. I brought a bouquet of flowers to visit him. At that time, my shadow was reflected on the tombstone, and I quietly looked at his refined and gentle face in the gray-white photo. Suddenly, the wind picked up. The strands of hair hanging over my shoulders were lifted by the wind, and the rustling of leaves sounded like a signal that a new chapter in the trajectory of fate was beginning. Later, time reversed, and I returned to the past. We met. I was glad that I returned before I met James. Instead of wasting time seeking revenge on him, I wanted to become a stranger to him, with no connection, just like what he said on the basketball court that day. I don't know her. My freshman year ended abruptly in chaos and haste. If I remember correctly, among the new students arriving at a university, there will be the person Mary likes. He's James's direct junior. According to the previous timeline, they met at a gathering organized by James. Mary would then fall for him, start pairing me with James, and eventually, through the coincidences she created over and over, James would propose that we be together. Now that we've gone back to the time before Mary and that guy met, he'll probably prevent them from meeting and end up with Mary. That's what I thought the ending would be, but fate always unfolds in dramatic ways. During the last professional course exam before the holiday, I sat diagonally behind Mary. After finishing the test and getting ready to submit my paper, I saw her suddenly wake up from sleeping on her desk and stand up abruptly. She looked at her test paper, glanced around, then grabbed a bewildered classmate next to her and asked excitedly, "What year is it now? Tell me, what year is it now?" I quietly watched her back, handed in my paper, and left. Outside the exam room, James was waiting for her. As I passed by, he suddenly called out to me. When I stopped, puzzled, and looked at him, he asked, "Are you with him?" I didn't know what he meant by that question, so I simply replied, "What does it matter to you?" After that, because of the holidays, I didn't see him for a long time. I had thought that the two of them, having come back to the past, would be heading towards each other and finally find happiness. But that didn't happen. Mary didn't choose James again. Even after another chance, she still liked James's Jr. What she said to James after being cheated on and divorced was nothing but a lie. Unexpectedly, this time, she didn't try to pair me with James. Instead, she tried to match James with Julia, the woman who, in the future, would be the cause of her husband's infidelity. I didn't know what had happened during the holiday, but when we met again, Mary and Julia had become friends. The night wind was a bit chilly as I walked back to the dorm with my books in hand, and from a distance, I saw James and Mary talking at the dormitory entrance. Without stopping, I walked past them, hearing their conversation behind me. Mary, I'm telling you again, she's not a good person. You're so innocent. If you don't stay away from her, you'll be deceived sooner or later. The next second, Mary's coquettish voice rang out. Brother, trust me, you just don't understand her. She's really great. You should give her a chance and be with her, please. Chapter 8. Mary announced her relationship 2 months later. It was a weekend, and I ran into a drunken James at a party. In the hallway outside the private room, as I was returning from the restroom, he suddenly pulled me into his arms, and the strong smell of alcohol enveloped me. Realizing what was happening, I struggled, but the more I resisted, the tighter he held me. He spoke in a hoarse voice by my ear. Minnie, why are you with him? He'll hurt you in the future. You must have been forced. You clearly like me, don't you? The one you like is me. When my resistance was futile and I was about to kick his leg, the hand pressing on my back suddenly released. The next second, someone grabbed his wrist and threw him to the ground. In my attempt to struggle free, I almost fell when I was suddenly let go, but a strong arm caught me around the waist just in time. It was Lucas. He happened to be there for a celebration organized by his group and had come out for some air when he stumbled upon the scene. Perhaps due to the pain, James sobered up a bit as he stood up against the wall, frowning at me. Brooklyn? Saying anything more was pointless, so I grabbed Lucas and started to leave, but James mocked me from behind. Are you proud of yourself, Brooklyn? I know you like me. Seeing me not ending up with Minnie makes you proud, doesn't it? Ha, so what if you're with him? He's just a short-lived ghost, destined to die. I knew he was probably mixing up memories from 2 different lives and was emotionally unstable. Starting to lash out. I didn't care what he said about me, but he shouldn't have said that about Lucas. I stopped, turned around, and walked up to James, who was still looking at us with contempt. I told him word by word, shut up, James. He won't die. Because I'm here. I'm here to change his fate. Although I can't go back to the time before his father died to save him, nor can I go back to the time before his mother died to save her. But I've traveled back to the present, and I can save him. My thoughts drifted as I walked out of the hotel, and just as a car honked while passing by, I realized I was still holding Lucas's hand. His slightly warm palm felt a bit damp. I paused for a second, immediately let go, and hid my hand behind my back, quietly clenching it. Sorry, I forgot. And also, thank you for what you did just now. His hand, which had been hanging at his side, clenched into a loose fist as he looked down at me and asked what he said just now. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly interrupted him. He was drunk and talking nonsense. Don't believe it, Lucas. You have a bright future ahead of you, with a long, long life to live. After a few seconds of silence, he suddenly smiled lightly and asked me, and you, Brooklyn? You'll become an excellent doctor in the future, won't you? After a long pause, I gave him a bright smile and nodded firmly. As long as I'm alive, I'll do my best to save lives. Chapter 9. In the end, Mary didn't succeed in pairing James and Julia together, but Julia did fall for James and started clinging to him. In a way, Mary's goal was achieved because Julia likely won't be the one to cause her husband's infidelity in the future. What she didn't expect, however, was that James had also traveled back in time, and like before, James stubbornly believed the lie Mary told him in their previous life, a lie that was like an oxygen mask keeping him barely alive in his love for her. The person who finally shattered that oxygen mask was Mary herself. It happened during a gathering that I didn't attend. When my 2 roommates returned to the dorm that night, They described the scene to me with extremely complex expressions. Mary got drunk and slapped Julia. No one could hold her back. She kept calling Julia a shameless homewrecker. The more her boyfriend tried to stop her, the crazier she got. But the strange thing is, her brother was unusually calm. He just stood there quietly, watching her go on a drunken rampage. I was slightly surprised for a moment, opened my mouth, but in the end, said nothing. James wasn't calm. He had given up. He had realized that Mary had also traveled back in time. And not only did she not choose to be with him, but she also used him as a pawn to keep Julia away. To James, he was nothing more than a joke. After that, I didn't see him around Mary for a long time. But Mary didn't seem to care. I did run into him a few times when I went to a university to visit Lucas. The most memorable time was when Lucas and I were having dinner at a newly opened restaurant outside the school. As we passed by an outdoor barbecue stall, a fight suddenly broke out. James was in the middle of it. The scene instantly became chaotic, filled with shouts, screams, and the sound of breaking glass. A shard from a smashed beer bottle flew straight toward me, but Lucas quickly pulled me into his arms. The shard grazed his cheek, leaving a thin cut. I cried out in fear. Lucas. He quickly led me into a nearby dumpling shop and reassured me. It's okay. Don't be scared. Later, before the police arrived, the commotion suddenly died down, and I used some bottled water to clean Lucas's wound. Then I took out a green cartoon band-aid from my pocket. As I leaned in to carefully apply it to his cut, James walked in. He was accompanied by a few others from the brawl, probably his friends, all of whom were injured to some extent. There was still a trace of blood at the corner of James's mouth, partially wiped away. As they continued cursing the other side of the fight with anger, I quietly finished putting the band-aid on Lucas. Then I heard James suddenly kick a table, his voice full of hostility. Shut up! The next day, James stopped me at school. It was snowing lightly, and his face still bore bruises. He looked at me with a complex expression and said, Brooklyn, you and he won't end well. Here's some advice, don't fall for him. My expression gradually turned cold, and I turned away, tossing back a reply, I'm not a psychiatrist. Don't come to me. From behind me came his slightly mocking, careless voice, Brooklyn, the person you should have fallen for is me. Chapter 10. In this life, I've had a peaceful journey, with the only calamity being my encounter with James and Mary, wasting 6 years of my life. And Lucas is the person to whom I owe a life. When I first traveled back, I thought I was here to change the fate of being with James, but I later realized that wasn't the case. One afternoon, near the end of my sophomore year, I was abruptly awakened from a nap by a nightmare. In the dream, I returned to that intersection. As I was crossing the street with other pedestrians, a speeding car rushed toward us. Amidst the panicked crowd, I watched helplessly as that black Mercedes blocked the car and then exploded. The old ceiling fan above me blew my hair into disarray as I stared blankly at the ceiling. I always knew this was an unsolvable problem. Aside from the fact that the driver wanted to run people over to take revenge on society, I didn't know anything else about him. I could save Lucas, or I could avoid that intersection. But what about the elderly, the children, the pregnant women, and the students who would be there? Once, in a moment of deep contemplation, I clung to a 1 in a million chance and went to the police, only to be told, Miss, have you been watching too many sci-fi movies? We solve cases with science, not superstition. At the beginning of June, during the college entrance exams, Lucas and I finished our tutoring jobs. By this time, I had known him for nearly 2 years, and I hadn't seen any special girl around him. Nor had he mentioned anyone. I could pretty much confirm that the screenshot of the secret crush was fake. I had imagined the type of girl he might like, perhaps beautiful, perhaps smart, perhaps as outstanding as he was. But no matter what type she was, she would surely be someone wonderful. That night, the students' parents invited us to dinner again to express their gratitude. Afterward, it was already dark as Lucas and I walked through the moonlit alley. Maybe it was because I knew the end of the road meant parting, or perhaps the night always brings thoughts of melancholy and longing. As we passed under a dim street lamp, I casually asked, Lucas, do you have someone you like? After a long silence, He responded with another question. Why do you ask? If you ever have someone you like, you must tell her. Don't secretly crush on her without letting her know. If you speak up, there's always a chance. As I finished speaking, we paused at the intersection, and he suddenly said to me, very seriously, Brooklyn, thank you. I thought he was thanking me for the advice and didn't think much of it. I went on living my life as usual, until the day before Lucas's sacrifice in my previous life. His professor asked him to drive and pick up some documents the next day. When I found out, I asked if he could go in the afternoon instead. A friend had given me 2 movie tickets for the morning. He said he could. The movie was one I chose at random, and coincidentally, it was about time travel. The synopsis read, the female lead goes back in time to make up for the male lead's regrets. As they fall in love, they realize it was all just a dream of the female lead. However, I didn't actually see the ending. Halfway through, I told Lucas, who was watching the movie intently, that I needed to use the restroom. It was as ordinary as any other day. I left the cinema, got into the rental car, and drove to that intersection. On the way, I suddenly realized that our meeting was destined to end in separation. Lucas, this time it's your turn to see the world of the future. Later, I stood at the intersection, watching the familiar crowd cross the street, waiting for that car to appear when suddenly an explosion rang out nearby. My heart skipped a beat. After a moment of blankness, I quickly got out of the car, dialing Lucas's number as I ran toward the explosion. The call went unanswered. Standing before the burning wreckage, my vision slowly blurred with tears. Dizziness almost overwhelmed me, and my last memory is, I still couldn't save him. Chapter 11. I woke up in a hospital room, the familiar scent of disinfectant in the air, the phone by my pillow, the white coat, the familiar nurse. All of it told me, it's 8 years later. The nurse said I had been unconscious for 20 minutes. I looked at the curtains fluttering in the breeze, momentarily unable to distinguish whether I had dreamed of the past or if this was the dream. It wasn't until I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom and saw that the scar on my forehead was gone that I was certain I had really traveled through time. With trembling fingers, I opened my phone's browser and quickly searched for keywords about that car accident. I found only a brief, obscure mention in an old article. The trending search was gone. Any mention of Lucas was gone. The tombstone was gone. Everything was gone. Later, I asked many people if they remembered the car accident that had trended 6 years ago. If they remembered the college student who sacrificed himself to save so many families. The answers were always one of 2. Brooklyn, are you sure you're not mistaken? I think there was a car accident, but I don't remember it trending. I don't know. 6 years ago is too long. Either I didn't pay attention or I forgot. Lucas had no family, and his former classmates had scattered across the world. I could only go to his university to look for his professor, whom I remembered, but I was told the professor had already gone abroad. I could no longer find any person or thing connected to Lucas. The only proof I had that I had really known him was in my phone, our last WeChat message. The final message in our conversation showed it was sent the day before the car accident. The one where he agreed to watch a movie with me. After that, 6 years of silence. I typed and deleted messages in that chat window. But in the end, I couldn't bring myself to send anything. I was afraid it would become a message that would never get a reply. As long as I didn't try to find out, I could believe he was still alive. I developed a habit of walking around a university whenever I had free time. More often than not, I would unconsciously find myself by the lake where we used to go. Lucas's lab was on the first floor nearby. Through the clear glass window, I seemed to see a thin figure in a white coat standing by the lab bench, focused on recording data on paper. In the next second, he disappeared. James came to find me the day after I returned. He said he didn't want to break up, that it had all been a moment of impulse, and begged me to believe in him one more time. Faced with his humble plea, I paused my pen as I was writing down a patient's condition, looked up calmly, and asked him, James, were we ever together? The color drained from his face instantly. The truth was, he had no evidence to prove we had ever been together. After traveling back, not only did Lucas's sacrifice disappear from the trending searches, but so did my 6-year relationship with James. Fate had brought the four of us back 8 years. He wanted to change Mary's fate of marrying a scumbag and be with her, so he personally altered our relationship. Although he eventually realized he was just being used, it was true that he and I no longer had any connection. After that, James became obsessed with trying to find any evidence to prove we had been together for 6 years. But it was all in vain. No friends on WeChat. No photos of us together, only pictures of him alone. Friends from our respective circles no longer knew each other, and the surveillance footage from the places we had visited no longer showed me. As time passed, many of my colleagues went from gossiping about him to sighing in sympathy. What a handsome guy, but he's lost his mind. I smiled and said softly to James, who had appeared once again, take a left outside to the psychiatry department. Go get checked out when you have time. Since I refused to acknowledge that James and I were ever together, the only person who knew we had been was Mary. After traveling back, she got cheated on again, even though she had prevented Julia and her husband from getting together. A cheater will always find a way to cheat. During the time James was pestering me, not only was Julia clinging to him, but Mary was also desperately throwing herself at him, frantically telling James how much she loved him and how helpless she was. At first, James responded coldly, then with increasing impatience, until one day, after being refused a meeting with James, Mary came to my place and caused a scene. I quietly watched her, then called security to take her away and said the same thing to her. Take a left outside to the psychiatry department. You should get checked out too. My colleague sighed again. That family really is something. None of them seemed to be all there. Things calmed down for a while. The next time I saw them was a month later when I went to the lab to pick up some materials and saw James angrily throwing some papers at 3 people on the other side. I didn't pay much attention and turned to leave. Later, I overheard some colleagues talking and learned that Mary's mother had found out about her relentless pursuit of James and had tried to stop her, saying something that James overheard. A blood test revealed that they were half-siblings, sharing the same father, with only 3 months between them. In other words, James's father had cheated while his mother was pregnant, and the lie Mary had used to deceive James, her mother had threatened to kill herself to keep them apart. After all this time, it turned out to be true. In mid-May, I was invited to give a lecture on first aid to students at a university. The hall was packed, and after the lecture, as I was gathering my things to leave, I suddenly noticed a familiar figure in the crowd dispersing below the stage. But before I could get a clear look, he was gone. The sky had already darkened, and as I walked to the auditorium doors, it began to drizzle. I hesitated for a moment. Then just as I was about to use my folder to shield myself from the rain and make a run for it, a black umbrella suddenly appeared over my head. The familiar scent of bitter grapefruit wafted from behind. Raindrops slid down the tilted umbrella, and my heart skipped a beat. After a long pause, I slowly turned around, still holding the folder over my head. What I saw was Lucas, whom I hadn't seen in 6 years. He was just as he had been before, his brow sharp and cold, his jawline distinct. Chapter 12. After the explosion from the car accident, Lucas was taken abroad by his professor for treatment and remained in a coma for about 2 years. When he woke up, he stayed abroad for continued treatment and studies, until now, when he returned to join the research institute and became a professor in the physics department at this university. This was how he summarized his 6 years in just a few words. I blinked, and all the things I wanted to say condensed into just 2 words. That's great. He's alive. That's great. The former teacher Wu is now Professor Wu. What hasn't changed is that he's still popular with the girls. It's said that his classes are so packed that students have to stand to listen. Out of curiosity, I once thought of attending one of his classes during my free time. But that day, he had swapped with another teacher at the last minute. And I didn't know. By the time I realized it, it was too late. I wanted to sneak out, but since I had chosen a spot in the inner corner by the window, it was hard to leave. Standing up would definitely draw attention from a large group of students around me. I struggled through half the class, and just as I sent a message to Lucas, I was called to answer a question, looking at the geological question on the board that I didn't understand at all. I took a deep breath, ready to apologize and say I was in the wrong class, when a low voice suddenly came from behind me. Archean. I instinctively repeated it, answered correctly, and sat back down. On my phone, Lucas hadn't replied to my message. Thinking of the reminder from the classmate behind me, I turned around quietly to thank him, only to meet that familiar, handsome face. Lucas was wearing a black hoodie, the hood casually pulled over his head, with his bangs slightly lowered, obscuring part of his eyes. In that moment, I seemed to see him as he was 8 years ago. I quickly turned back around, slightly stunned, and just as I was about to ask why he was here, my phone buzzed on my lap. It was a message from him. I happened to see you enter this classroom, so I wanted to see what kind of class could interest our Dr. Brooklyn enough to attend. And right above that was the message I had sent him for help a few minutes earlier. I originally wanted to attend your class, but it seems I entered the wrong room. What should I do now? My phone buzzed again, and his message appeared. Oh, turns out this is my class. Me. In the 6 years that passed, Lucas's personality seems to have changed a bit. He's still distant and cool, but he was more restrained back then. From that point on, my relationship with Lucas returned to what it had been 6 years ago. But there was something different about it this time. At first, I couldn't figure out what it was, until one day, when I went to the school to see him, I overheard a conversation by chance. It seemed to be a colleague of his, troubled by love, sighing and asking him, "Hey, Professor Wu, how can I make her know that I like her?" Sigh. You definitely don't have this problem, so you wouldn't understand my pain. Lucas didn't respond, and the colleague continued, "By the way, you've turned down so many people. Is it because you already like someone?" I held my breath and heard a simple Without saying a word, I quietly turned and left. 6 years is a long time, and a lot can happen in that time. Chapter 13. I admit it, I like Lucas. As for when that sense of wanting to make amends turned into affection, I can't trace it back to the source. But at that time, I knew it was something that wouldn't lead anywhere. So I chose to suppress it until 6 years later, when the spring breeze came, and it spread instantly. After that, I used the excuse of being busy with work and needing to stay late, seeing him less and keeping our relationship at a distance, not too close, but not too far, until he showed up in my consultation room for 3 days in a row. I told him, somewhat helplessly, "Lucas, you don't need to come every day." He stubbornly and earnestly replied, "I made an appointment and waited in line. What I mean is, you don't need to come every day for a checkup. It's not that serious." He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was low, as if he was holding back something. "Actually, I'm not here for a checkup." Before he could finish his sentence, a man with a knife suddenly burst into the room. I recognized him. He was the husband who had domestically abused his wife, causing her to take her own life after we couldn't save her at the hospital. Since then, he had always blamed the doctors for her death. Just like now, he was agitated, holding the knife and glaring at me as he said viciously, "You're the one who killed my wife." Later, in the midst of the chaos, the man was subdued, and Lucas got injured while protecting me. The wound was on his shoulder, requiring 10 stitches. I stood by his hospital bed, looking at his pale face, and suddenly felt a lump in my throat, making my voice sound off. I'm sorry, whether it was in the past or now. I always seemed to cause him to get hurt because of me. After he was hospitalized for half a month, I drove him home and gently suggested, "I could hire a male nurse for you. It wouldn't be good for people to misunderstand." He was typing on his phone with one hand, and when he heard this, his fingers paused, and he turned to ask, "Misunderstand what?" The car fell silent for a moment. A breeze blew in from the window, and his bangs fluttered with it, stirring a slight ripple in the calm lake of my heart. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, kept my eyes on the road, and said nothing more. In the end, since he refused to let a stranger into his home to take care of him, I took on the responsibility I should have. But in truth, he didn't need much care. I would simply prepare lunch in advance each morning before work, have breakfast with him, and then go to work. In the evenings, I would return to have dinner with him. As time passed, I began to feel a strange sense growing inside me. One night, I had to attend a colleague's birthday party that I couldn't avoid, so I called him in advance to let him know I'd be back late. Later, my car broke down, and a male colleague who was heading in the same direction gave me a ride home. As soon as I opened the door, a strong, sour smell hit me. I saw Lucas sitting at the dining table, poking at the food in his bowl, so I asked, "What are you eating?" He looked calm and spoke in a normal tone. "Can't you tell? I'm eating vinegar." Me? I walked over to the table and saw that he had ordered dumplings from a takeout place, and the small dish in front of him was filled to the brim with vinegar. I cooked some noodles for him, opened the windows to let in some fresh air, and reminded him, "Don't eat like this next time. The smell of vinegar is too strong." He silently ate his noodles, not saying a word. The next day, one of his colleagues came to visit him. It was the teacher who had previously asked him if he had someone he liked. The fact I had tried to ignore resurfaced. Lucas has someone he likes. I didn't know what that teacher said to him, but it seemed to affect his mood, and then I was annoyed with myself for being too concerned about him. So, that evening during dinner, I said to him, "Your wound is almost healed." He looked at me, nodded, and replied, "Yeah." After dinner, I quietly went to the bathroom to prepare warm water for him, habitually reminding him not to get his wound wet. But as I was leaving, I slipped and almost fell. In that critical moment, he pulled me into his arms. The sound of our hearts beating wildly made it hard for me to tell whose was whose. After a few seconds, I tried to get up, but he held me tightly by the waist, not letting me move. The bathroom was filled with steam, and where our bodies touched, it felt like a fire was slowly igniting. He looked down at me, his expression different from usual. His eyes seemed to be churning with something, and his voice was low and hoarse. "Brooklyn, I have to confess something." "What?" "I have improper feelings for you." My mind was a mess, and the increasingly heated atmosphere burned away all my rationality. I instinctively blurted out the conversation I overheard that day when someone asked him if he had someone he liked. He clearly said yes. The next second, he turned me around, pressing me against the sink, freeing one hand to write a few words on the fogged-up mirror. "It's you, Brooke." Chapter 14. Not long after Lucas and I got together, I finally asked him a question that had been buried in my heart for a long time. Why didn't he contact me at all during the 6 years he was abroad? At the time, he was sitting on the couch reading a physics journal. When he heard my question, he pulled me into his arms, the faint scent of bitter grapefruit wafting from him. I heard his low, raspy voice. I was afraid. Before I could respond, he continued, holding me close, "Afraid that I'd become a cripple and wouldn't be good enough for you. Afraid that if I contacted you, I'd want more. And most of all, afraid that you might already have someone you liked." A pang of sadness welled up inside me, and my eyes stung with tears. I wrapped my arms around him and, full of emotion, whispered, "Lucas, you're amazing. To have come through such a difficult journey and still be here in front of me." For a moment, there was silence. Then his hand moved down along my waist, and he chuckled softly, his voice teasing, "I'm even more amazing in other ways. Want to find out? Dr. Brooklyn?" Me? The tender moment was instantly ruined. After that, Lucas made it his mission to continually prove himself to me, often pausing halfway to ask if I thought he was amazing. I never answered, and he never gave up. The first time Lucas took me to meet his parents was 6 months into our relationship. I was surprised when I saw the woman on the tombstone. She was a beautiful and gentle woman, but in the end, she had been ravaged by illness beyond recognition. I was there when she died. My mother was her attending physician. In my senior year of high school, every time I went to the hospital to see my mom, I'd often see this auntie. If I didn't find my mom in her office, I'd wait in her room. Over time, we became familiar with each other. I would cut fruit for her, fold paper cranes, and chat with her. She passed away just before the college entrance exams. It was my first time facing a serious illness and death head-on, and I suddenly understood why my parents, busy with their work at the hospital, had little time for me. So when it came time to choose my major, I picked the one I used to hate the most, medicine. I thought at the time that only cancer was incurable, and I wanted to find a way to cure it. But after studying medicine, I realized that there are few diseases that can be completely cured. I never imagined that she was Lucas's mother. On the way back, I leaned against the car window, watching the trees fly by, and softly said, "Lucas, I actually met your mother a long time ago." He responded calmly, "Yeah, I know." My heart stirred, and I guessed he might have seen me back then. I saw James again one evening. 6 months later, Lucas had sent me a message saying, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. I changed clothes, ready to leave work, and then ran into James in the elevator. He looked pale and thin. It was just the two of us. In the silence, the elevator reached the first floor. I started to walk out, but he suddenly grabbed my arm and, looking down, asked, "Brooklyn, can we talk?" I frowned and pulled away from his grip, coldly saying, "James, let's not waste each other's time." He seemed to have expected my response and smiled self-deprecatingly, saying, "You probably won't believe it, but in another timeline, we were together for 6 years." Not wanting to engage, I turned to leave, and behind me, I heard him say in a low voice, "But I wasn't good to you, and I lost you." I hesitated for a moment but continued walking. By the flower bed outside the hospital, Lucas was waiting for me. In the setting sun's glow, I suddenly remembered the second time the students' parents invited us to dinner. I had arrived first and thanked them for their concern when I was injured and hospitalized. In response, they had said, puzzled, "I didn't ask Lucas to check on you. I just casually mentioned that you couldn't come." And later he said he had something to do at school and left. So, that's how it was. My thoughts were interrupted as Lucas took my hand, tucking a strand of hair that had been tousled by the evening breeze behind my ear. I wrapped my arms around his and leaned against him, full of joy and contentment, and said, "Lucas, the wind is rising." Lucas Epilogue. The comments online weren't wrong. I'm alone in this world. It's better for me to die alone than to destroy so many families. In reality, I'm not that noble. The instinct to survive is natural in humans. But if there's someone I care about in the midst of it all, I'd willingly trade my life for hers. After the explosion, when I regained consciousness, I found myself trapped in a cemetery. At first, on every anniversary of my death, the people I saved and some online strangers would come to visit me. What I heard most were words of gratitude and praise, saying my death had been valuable. As time went on, the visits dwindled until only Brooklyn kept coming. She didn't speak much. Most of the time, she would just place flowers in front of my tombstone, clean up the area around it, and then sit quietly for a while. The first time I heard her speak was on the 4th anniversary of my death. By then, no one else came to see me. In the misty rain, she stood in front of my tombstone, looking down at my photo, as if making a promise. "Lucas, don't worry. I won't forget you." That was the first time she called me by my name. I never would have imagined that our meeting would happen through death. But if I had the chance to do it all over again, I would still make the same choice. So when, unexpectedly, I was brought back 8 years earlier in the 6th year after my death, I still chose the same ending. I knew she had also traveled back in time, and I knew her approach was filled with a desire to make amends and feelings of guilt. But that was enough. It was certainly better than in the previous life, where we never even met, wasn't it? The years I spent alone were incredibly long and frightening, but those 2 years when I knew her were the first time I felt the fleeting nature of time. If I was destined not to be her lover, then being someone she would never forget in her lifetime was also good enough. I actually don't remember what the criminal looked like, nor do I know his license plate number, but I remember that before reaching the intersection, he threw a few beer cans out the window, drinking while driving. This was the only clue I had to intercept him before Brooklyn arrived. So when I saw him throw a beer can out of the car window again, I caught up and honked my horn at him. Surprisingly, he seemed to be triggered, immediately swerving toward a nearby small plaza, as I accelerated to block his path. I couldn't help but think of that movie I never finished watching. I guess I'll never know how it ends. That year, in late spring, I took a leave from school to visit my mother in the hospital. The room was quiet, and my mother was still asleep. As I approached the other side to sit down and read, I noticed a plate of neatly cut fruit on the table beside the bed, along with a white paper crane. I paused, a little surprised. And then my mother woke up. She smiled gently and said to me, "That crane was made for me by Brooke.